Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here. Today, I want to present to you my research topic, which is about cultural landscape, in particular, historical cultural landscape, and how to represent and visualize data and sources about historical rural landscape. First of all, what is a cultural landscape? Cultural landscape is any landscape which has a strong connection with a human culture, and they can be places that has been shaped by human's action over time. And what we can see today is the result of such interactions. For instance, the famous cultural site of Machu Picchu in Peru, or they can be also places that has not been touched by human, but hold some intrinsic values, such spiritual or religious values, like as the Ayers Rock cultural sites in Australia. So why we are interested in cultural landscape? We are interested in cultural landscape because they are just considered, usually they are just considered as static backgrounds for historical events or cultural objects. So we know that a place is famous because a famous monument is still there, or because of an historical events occurred in such place. But we don't think about the transformation process. We don't think about the how what we can see today has been shaped through time. So our goal is to consider cultural landscape as dynamic entities, so we can interpret the evolution process and also how humans can relate and interact with landscape. So, for instance, if we consider the cultural landscape of Cinque Terre in Liguria, Italy, we are used to think at such landscape just as a postcard place. So it is famous for its aesthetic appearance. But if we consider it as a dynamic entity, we can discover, for instance, how this place has been adapted by human in response to the hydrogeological risk, for instance. So, starting from this, we can see that we discover that this is a thing also in the state of the art, in particular when projects try to represent cultural landscape, they just focus, like in the first case, they just focus on the archival dimension. So they provide interfaces for accessing historical documentation and interpretation, but they take out the landscape dimension from the equation. And on the other case, they try to reconstruct a virtual representation of landscape, but they take, in this case, they take out the cultural dimension. So they just try to recreate the landscape for as it appeared, but not the process that brought the cultural landscape into the existence. So our goal was to allow domain experts and scholars to represent and visualize relationship between cultural landscape and cultural element within them, and also to how to represent and visualize documentation about cultural landscape and cultural element, and also, of course, frame the evolution of such elements through time and space. So we adopt a three-step methodology, which consists, of course, of three different steps. The first one is the conceptualization step, which consists of devising a set of semantic knowledge representation schemas to represent both the cultural landscape and also the documentation and interpretation from expert regarding cultural landscape in general, but also cultural object within cultural landscape. The second step is the encoding and annotation step, which consists of using the previously created semantic knowledge schemas to set up a semantic multimedia database for storing all the information about landscape and documentation. And of course, this database should be filled by a domain expert. And finally, the last step is the visualization step, which consists of diverse interactive interfaces, and they are not seen as digital archives, so they should not provide access like a direct access like a list of elements, but the idea is that they should arrange contents according to a narrative provided by a domain expert. So before going into our preliminary representation, I want to introduce the domain of interest with an example, which is Safarda agricultural landscape, which is a case study of the project. And it is a cultural landscape from 13th century, created by monks, Cistercian monks. And the idea is that, as you can see here, we have the green circle, or the yellow circle in this case, which represents the total landscape area. And then we have the red circles, which represent more or less the area of the site of interest. So we can divide the global cultural landscape in different sites of interest, which can be discontinuous, non-contiguous, geographically speaking. And finally, we have the blue dots, which represents the landmark that can be related to cultural, to set of interest, like in this case, or it can be just related to the domain, the general cultural landscape. Other entities that a relationship that we want to represent regarding all the documentation, historical documentation that we have from the project, and also their interpretation by scholars. So we have different types of document here. We have historical maps that can be more or less accurate. Then we have the textual documents describing not just as a description of an element within the landscape, but they also discuss how the landscape has changed according to, for instance, land donation from a noble to the monk communities. And then we have, of course, the result of present day interpretation, like GIS file or Erascal that comes from present day surveys. So, and finally, the conceptualization as a goal, not, as I said before, not to access knowledge as it is, but arrange it according to a narrative, or what we called here a cultural or scholar theme, which is a kind of narrative that historians, for instance, or domain experts in general use to present their research output. For instance, what you can see here in the figure, we have the same landmark, and we can confront the landmark through time. This is from 19th century, and this is how it appears now, today. And here we can confront and retrieve the documentation related to it according to a narrative or a theme, and in this case is the continuity over time of the land use. So how and if the shape of the fields is maintained through centuries, and also how culture, how typologies of culture in terms of cultivation is changed. Okay, so we try to define some competency question that can help us in defining our semantic schema. I don't go in detail here, but the most relevant one is the first one, of course. which consists of retrieve all the documents which describe a specific location according to a specific cultural theme and also according to a specific time interval. So giving, if we fixed our cultural theme and a temporary interval, we should be able to retrieve all the documents describing our cultural location. So here we devised two different ontology, which are in a very draft and preliminary state. The first one is at top level, which is focused on how we can connect the actual element in the landscape, which is the cultural item here, which can be a set of interest, it can be a landmark, but it could also be a document. And here is the participatory item, which is the item that will be shown in the interface to describe the cultural item. And this connection is mediated, let's say by a theme. So we can select a theme, and for each theme we should have all the cultural items that are related to that theme, and each cultural item is described within the interface by a participatory item. And at this level, here we have the documentation or interpretation item, while here we have the digital twin, or let's say a simulation or something that has been created by experts to describe to show in the interface the cultural item. And this one is the preliminary study of on how to represent the connection between document and the temporal manifestation of a landmark or a cultural site. So here we have the actual documentation item, for instance, a map. And here with presence, we have the temporal manifestation of a site of interest or landmark, which is connected with a place and a precise time span. And I'm currently working with Mark on it. These are the three major challenges that we have to deal with. The first one is trying not to reduce a cultural landscape just like a sum of different elements. So before I say that, we can think at landscapes, then a set of interest, and then landmark. But this is just too simplistic to say. The idea is that we want to connect also the documentation with such items, but also we want to connect and explicit the relationship between this cultural landscape and other cultural landscapes. For instance, in our case study, we know that the Safarda cultural landscape is strongly linked with other cultural landscape from the same monk community. So we want to represent that link. Also, we have to deal with the non-continuous and non-heterogeneous area that such landscape occupies. And the idea is that we want to represent the area, we don't want to focus on the geographical area of a landscape, but on the influence area. So how much each cultural site and each landscape could influence the area surrounding it and try to relate it to other entities. And finally, we have to deal with such documents, which is a map, an historical map, but with imprecise temporal data and also geographical data. So we know that, for instance, this document is related to our landscape, but we can't place it in time and also in space. we have toponyms, but yeah, the idea is that and this is what I told you before, but the idea here is and this is what I'm working with Marco right now, is try to represent the uncertainty of data. So how we can also both represent and visualize the uncertainty in time and space related to historical documentation. So starting from these preliminary schemas, we have to provide some demo interfaces for scholars, because as we saw in the past, it's hard for non-computer scientists, let's say, imagine how to arrange and represent their data and the research output in a digital system without actually see how it could be. So starting from this project, which is the project that has been presented 2 days ago at the International Semantic Web Conference, we take this interface as inspiration, and here we have 2 different places, which are the narrative plays, so the narrative which appear in a film, and here we have the displayed plays, which are the corresponding real-world location where the film were shot. And here we have 2 different maps for comparing 2 different plays according to a narrative. And in this case, the narrative was the film narrative. The idea is to extend this paradigm to confront the same place, but 2 different temporal manifestations of the same place. And the narrative or cultural theme should help in showing only the documentation and interpretation related to the narrative that scholars want to disseminate. And this is what we are working on. And this is the interface that I'm working on with my supervisor in Italy right now. But as we discovered with Marco, the idea is that with this interface we can only compare 2 different temporal manifestations. But in our case, we have a lot of data that spans across different centuries. So the idea is to adopt a 3D approach where the y-axis is used to represent the temporal extent. And the idea is that we want to initially plot all the document as data points in this space. Each data points here represent a document which has been positioned in time and space. And different color means, of course, different type of document. And the idea is that we can interact with each sphere and access knowledge about knowledge and metadata about such a document, but also the idea is to link and visualize that link between different documents, but also with elements which are positioned on the map. So the idea is that in the next month, so during November, we want to inject our preliminary ontology in the system and trying to annotate such a data point with the preliminary semantic knowledge representation. So the user can select each data point and not just access the already present knowledge, but also to add new knowledge and add new information. And this is what hopefully we are going to do in the next month. So we have still a lot of things to do. The first one is, of course, refine the semantic representation that it is at a preliminary state. Then we have to define how to represent the uncertainty, not just like point, but also using segment, area, volumes, and other kinds of strategies for representing the uncertainty. And finally, we have to define the annotation workflow in both 2D case and 3D case. Thank you.